For tonight's class, you're going to need your reader part 2, so make sure you have that handy and accessible. Also, a couple of important dates for you to note. Our last actual meeting will be December 8th in 3 weeks. Obviously, we don't meet next week. And then everything in the folder should be completed no later than December 15th. And that's when I'll start entering grades. So make sure that you have everything complete and tucked away nicely in the appropriate folder by the 15th of December at the very latest. Okay.
Excuse me.
Question?
Yeah. By the folder, you mean like the IQs and the QWs?
Yep.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. It's one big folder that's divided into 2. So again, we don't meet next week, obviously, but the 1st and the 8th will be our final 2 meetings. The goal for me is to get through and complete everything in reader part 2, and then we get everything locked in and ready to go. Okay? And the 15th deadline is, again, in lieu of our final exam. We don't have a final. Everything that's in the folders comprises your semester's work. Okay? Got a few more people coming in here. Let me get them in. So once again, everything, the last 2 class sessions, December 1st and 8th, we don't meet next week, obviously. And then everything in the folder has to be complete by, we got more people coming in, by the 15th of December. Okay. I'll try to review that at the end of the class session tonight. I don't want to hold everybody up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started tonight. All right, as usual, we'll just take a minute to kind of chill out here and decompress from the whatever it took to get you to where you are right now. So we'll just do a little breathing activity. Follow along. Okay. Well, I'll just share a couple of interesting approaches that a school is taking in terms of introducing environmental math. So here's a classroom where the door is marked with the different angles. So you see that it's set up there. Give kids an idea of how these items work. And then also the stairways, there's environmental math where they get to pick up on some of the cues here about the multiplication tables. Also in the right-hand corner, you'll see the directions, vertical and horizontal, latitude, longitude. So again, introducing this idea of picking up cues for environmental print. And then again, learning multiples as you climb the stairs. And early reading using consonant plates to do a word collection activity. I thought it was an interesting way to get kids into, creating some environment regarding picking up their incidental reading proficiency. Now, one of the things that I added to the Canvas was another word collection activity that we use in our program called Predicting ABCs. And in this particular one, the article we were looking at was the issue of racism in soccer. And as one of the introductory activities, we did an introductory prediction ABCs where we asked kids for words that they associate with the word soccer. And so if they had the word goal, they would put it in the third square on the top as an alphabetical sort. What this does is allows us to assess how much background knowledge kids have coming in to learning an activity. When I did this with an article about debris in outer space, the association was for any word that has to do with something with outer space. And so kids put up, planets, stars. There was an occasional galaxy, and other words you might think of sun, moon. But the issue around the article we were looking at was the issue of debris in outer space. And in order to be clear on how that works, there was one word that they needed to have in their belt, and that was the word vacuum. So heretofore, they had thought that vacuum was something that you clean the rugs with without understanding that vacuum is the pressure, the zero air pressure environment in space. In order to understand how debris floats in space, along with other things, they needed to have that concept. So I added the word in, and it created the teachable moment to pre-teach that concept. If they hadn't had that concept in place, then they would have not understood where we were going. So there's a blank template. It's a Word document that I posted in Canvas. Same thing, it's just that I left the titles out, and in the directions, there are blank spaces for you to fill in any title and things like that. So it's up there in Canvas as we speak. Now, another interesting thing that we try to do sometimes is the math integration with language arts. And so we're going to be learning something about lemmings the next time we meet, but I wanted to introduce this to you early. So let me read it to you, and then you'll get an idea of how this works. Lemmings are little tiny furry creatures that live in the northern wasteland, and the legend is that they migrate every year in the spring thaw. But a lot of them get devoured by predators and other natural events. But this is the way the story goes, and I'll show you how the math works in a minute. The lemmings were starting their march after a long winter sleep. All the lemmings assembled in preparation for their march to the sea, unaware of the danger. As they began their journey, the first wolf pack came down from the hills and devoured one half of all the lemmings in the pack. Then the eagles came in and ate 2/3 of the lemmings that were left. Next, the wolverines stormed in and ate one half of the lemmings that were left. Amazingly, the last 10 lemmings made it to the sea. Biologists want to know how many lemmings were in the pack when they started their march. So in order to do this, you have to start and read it backwards. So you have to start with the number 10, which is the only number you get. And then in the sentence above that, you see that it constitutes one half of the lemmings, which now makes it 20. And then if 20 is the lemming that are remaining, then the next sentence up, it says 2/3, then you'd have 60. And then if 60 represents one half, then you end up with 120. So that's kind of the way it works. You have to actually read it first and then essentially read it backwards, okay? So being that we have a holiday coming, I made up one for Thanksgiving, and I'll share it with you. And it's also posted in Canvas, should you decide to take it on. It's called the Turkey Lurkey Market. All of the Thanksgiving turkeys were delivered just in time for the holidays. People around town always could count on the Turkey Lurkey Market to have the best and freshest turkeys. And every year, people would always flock to the store from all over town to buy them. Lots of bird humor in this, by the way. Mr. Cranberry, the owner who broke the mold, was always happy to help people who made their annual pilgrimage in their finest Thanksgiving dressing to the store to celebrate the holiday in their small town of Wishbone. People often said that no one could beat their drumsticks. The store was set to open on Monday before Thanksgiving to begin their sales. On that morning, when people asked, "Where you going?" the answer was always Turkey Lurkey. When people new to the town would ask, what was the best way to get to the Turkey Lurkey, people would joke, you walk a lot, eh? Which sounds a bit like you walk a lote in Spanish. Some people didn't get the joke. As they opened their doors, the first holiday gobblers entered the store and stuffed the counter space before the clerk could finish hanging the open for business sign. The buying of the birds was fast and furious, and the turkeys were flying out of the market's doors. After the first group came in, the clerks had to ask people to line up outside as they were already over capacity, and the line went around the block. As the first group left, one half of the remaining birds were gone. Right behind them was another group that came in. They were hungrily ready to purchase the delicious birds. As they cleared out, they had taken 3/4 of the birds, leaving only 1/4 of those remaining birds. The market manager, fearing that their sales were going to go foul, figured that they better order more birds as soon as they could muster their giblets to contact the farm. Then a third group came in and pecked through the turkey supply. Once that group had taken 2/3 of the remaining birds, leaving only 1/3, and the sales were not tailing off. Mr. Cranberry, the owner, along with his assistant manager, Mrs. Winger, counted the remaining turkeys, only to realize that there were only 20, or 1/3, still cooped up in the freezer. Good gravy, he thought. How many turkeys did we start with? Help Mr. Cranberry figure out how many turkeys were in the market when they started their sale. Write the answer, describe how you got your answer in the space below. So there's a little bit of Thanksgiving math language integration. The answer that you should come up with is 480. So if you want to try it out and check my math, then that's great. And then let me know if I made a mistake. Okay, but it's also posted in Canvas. So let's do a quick review of what we've talked about over the past week or so. We've been tackling the domains of interaction, and we talked about fluency last week, along with vocabulary instruction. We're going to hit schema tonight and dip into cognitive strategies. And of course, at the center of all of this is the issue of motivation. So with fluency, if you recall, we talked about the notion of sounds and symbols and how kids make associations and recognize the alphabetic code, start blending words and doing all that kind of thing to have more automatic recognition. They gain more meaning, understanding that words are meanings and concepts, but also that even a smallest morpheme, like the letter S, can change the meaning of the sentence in the words. In other words, they have character, becomes they have characters, and notice how the whole meaning shifts. And then letter construction, the writing conventions, etc., are all tied to orthography. So tonight we want to talk about schema, and if you'll turn in your readers to page 31, we'll begin that section. So one of the schema activation activities that we can use is something like this on page 32, where you have a series of words. And the idea behind this is that there is one word that can be in common to make a compound word with all of the words in each row. So for example, in number 1, you have the words call, pay, and line. Can anybody think of a word that you could hook onto those words that would work for all three?
Oh, God.
I think somebody said phone.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, I couldn't hardly hear you. Yeah, so phone would work in that one. And in number 2, you have elephant, swim, and tree. What's a word that would be a common feature for those words?
Trunk.
Right. Good. Okay. Now, number 3, it's a little bit harder, but I can tell you this is a hot topic. We have man, storm, and shore. This is a hot one. Don't play with
Fire.
yes, fireman, firestorm, and surefire. So you kind of get the idea, and I'm not going to leave you hanging with these. If you turn to page 39, you'll see all of the answers there. But these are fun to put up on the board and have your kids see if they can come up with a word that would fit all three. If you use call as the example, then they'll catch on right away. And maybe 1 or 2 at the beginning of a period, leave it up there and see if anybody makes the connection. It's just a way to bring in prior knowledge and some vocabulary into the mix. And then the other thing I like to do, of course, as you know by now, is to share puns with my students, because we know that humor elevates the IQ and intelligence as well. So on page 33, there is a series of puns there for you to explore. Let's take a minute and look at them and see if you can share one you like.
You said, do we share one if we like one? Or
Yeah, sure.
you feel stuck with your debt if you can't budget?
All right. Thank you. Anybody else have one?
I have one.
Okay,
Practice safe eating. Always use condiments.
there you go. My favorite one is a plateau is a high form of flattery. Anybody else have one they like? Marcel? I think you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Got you now, yeah.
Okay. I said a boiled egg in the morning is hard to beat.
Okay, good. Anybody else have one that caught your eye? Okay, well, these are always good for language development too, so they're available for you should you decide to use them. Okay, let's take a look at a particular text selection and see what some of the challenges might be for some of our students in terms of language and text. And this is from Integrated Coordinated Science. I did all the ESL augmentations for their chemistry course. And what I found was that a lot of the writing that was in these texts was very confusing, not only for English learners, but even for some English speakers. So let's take a look at part of this and we'll share some ideas. You know, when you approach a text as a proficient reader, you do some self-questioning without even really realizing it. You first of all ask yourself, well, who is the writer of this piece? And, you know, what is their background in terms of what's the qualifications of the person? Do they really know what they're talking about? Are they an authority in the area or something like that? We want to figure out maybe who the audience is for whom their writing is intended, the purpose of the selection, and also in our own way imagining what the writer of the selection might have sounded like. So here's a chapter from Integrated Coordinated Science on food chains and webs. Okay. Can I get a volunteer to read this aloud for us? Okay, I will volunteer.
I could do it.
Okay, Maria, thanks.
A bat ate a mosquito that had bitten a coyote that had eaten a grasshopper that had chewed a leaf. All these living things make up a food chain. A food chain is a step-by-step sequence that links together organisms that feed on each other. The story, however, is incomplete. It does not mention that many animals other than coyotes eat grasshoppers and mosquitoes by other animals. It also does not consider that the kind of plant a grasshopper might eat may also be eaten by various other living things. When you consider that the kind of plant a grasshopper might eat may be eaten by many other consumers, you start to build a picture that links together a whole community of living things.
Okay, thank you very much. So what might be some challenges for our readers in attempting to make sense of this paragraph? Anybody have any ideas that appear right away?
Something that sounds unusual, you say?
Can you say that one more time?
You said something that is unusual, right?
Something that might be a challenge to the students in terms of their understanding.
Basically, it's this one. It's the beginning sentence that actually sort of confused me.
Okay.
Because one is that the bat ate a mosquito. Well, there you go. And then, a bat ate a mosquito that had bitten a coyote. A mosquito bitten a coyote? Because in English terms, that doesn't really work.
Well,
It had eaten a grasshopper that had chewed a leaf. Well,
I guess
that part is understandable to read, the last part. But the first part sort of didn't make sense.
Well, the confusing thing about this is mosquitoes certainly can stick their needle into a coyote like they can any other animal. But the question really is, what's confusing about this is what's the first thing that happened in this sentence?
Is that a bat ate a mosquito?
Well, that's what you would think, right?
Yeah.
But actually, if you look at the sequence, it's written backwards. Because it starts with the grasshopper that had chewed a leaf, right? So that's really the first thing that happens. But see, this is confusing kids right off the bat. Okay, because the end part is that the bat eats a mosquito. Okay, so that's how these things happen in the food chain. So let's take a look at some other aspects of it that might be confusing. And a lot of this is just simply because the language can be difficult. So for example, if we think about a food chain, you have to understand, you have to have a degree of background knowledge to integrate the notion of food in a chain, right? Because for a student, a chain might be something that they use to lock up their bicycle, or it could be something that's part of a fence. Additionally, the word step by step may not be something that they understand in terms of the intended use here, and sequence may not be part of their expressive vocabulary either. Additionally, the word that is often used as a reference to something. Look at that over there. And now we see a different linguistic structure where we're saying that links together. Okay, so that's a different kind of linguistic structure that kids may not be aware of. Organisms is one of those tier 3 words that they're going to need to know in order to understand the working of this. And then here again, we have that linguistic structure of that and feed, which may be confusing as well. Now what comes in here is something called the story, but we're not sure really, if we're looking for a story, we're not sure about the story, are we? And the word however, which is a signal word, may not be a word they're aware of either. And of course, the prefix in is something they need to have awareness of as well. Now the word it here is a pronoun referent. And what is the it referring to here? It's referring to a story, but I still don't see a story. Right? There's no story in here yet. And then the word mention may also be a word that I am unaware of. It's not part of my vocabulary yet. And then we have another word other than, which may not be, it's probably more of an academic language construction, but it may not be familiar to our students. Now this structure here is also interesting because if a student were to read this at first glance, they might read that coyotes eat grasshoppers and mosquitoes. right? So unless they have awareness of how this text actually flows, it's going to be more confusing. We have the word it here again, which again is a pronoun referent. It's still referencing the story, if we can figure that out, but we still don't really see a story. So the students are waiting for a story that doesn't appear. And then consider, if the word that they know of is consider means to think about, they're using consider in relation to the object of the story, which also may not make sense, okay? Here's that word that once again. And then now we ask the story to consider. Now we're asking the reader to consider. So you see how confusing this can be all the way through? The word that again. And a student might read this as a kind of plant a grasshopper might eat may. They're not aware of that linguistic construction. And then the word various may not be in their vocabulary, as is consumers, because consumers used in this context is different than what people may think of in terms of consumers. Consumers may be our Kmart shoppers or our Costco shoppers. All right, they're not aware that consume means to actually eat. They're used to seeing the word consumers as shoppers. And then the notion of building a picture, which is a figurative part of speech, may not make sense either. And then here's that phrase, that links again. Okay, and as we go on, the word resemble may not be in their vocabulary, and rather than may not be a construction that they're aware of either. So you can see how even not even getting into the content, how confusing some of this can be for our students. So we really need to heavily scaffold and introduce them to these ideas through an analysis of the reading. Of course, a read aloud would be one way to handle this as well, right? Because again, for a lot of our students, when they start reading this and go through it, they're going to be lost right off the bat. No pun intended about the bat eating the mosquito. But right off the bat, makes sense in that context, you could say. Additionally, one of the things that was confounding was the prompts that the students were asked to do when it came to answering questions, the usual questions at the back of the chapter. So actually, what do these mean? I mean, what do we do when we link the names? What's the actual physical activity that they're supposed to do? We make assumptions that they understand these, but in fact, they may not. What do they do? What does it mean to show something? How do they actually do that? How do they use arrows to show? And of course, this means draw them, right? But it doesn't specifically state that. What do they do when they identify something? How do they express that? How do they determine which is, if they're making choices? How do they clear a large area? What does it mean to obtain? What does it mean to suppose? And in which situation, we're going to probably see one or two or three different situations that will come out of that prompt. The thing is that we can't assume that even with the questions and the prompts that kids are given, that they really understand the task at hand. So you see the difficulty that a lot of our students have, and even particularly compounded from our English learners. I always say that this leads to utter confusion. So we have to be very clear in terms of how we express their understanding and get them to understand what the tasks at hand actually are. So we know that, overall reading is a process. And the idea that we're after here is to get information from the text into the reader's head, but also it's a two-way process because we also know that part of the task here is to activate background knowledge. And then when we come into the cognitive strategy piece, then we're going to be doing is guiding them through a series of activities, not only in Chapter 7 in Baka, which were good examples, but also Chapter 10 coming up later, so that eventually we can create some awareness of strategies kids can use so that eventually we'll see their grades come up and we can begin to release the control to make them function more independently. So here's a simple example of how schema might work in a simple situation. So here's a sentence that says, "Oh, Bill, she cried, I missed you." Now, in your mind, you may portray this as a picture of something like this, right? So that's what your first thought is. But what actually happens is when the prediction fails because new information comes in, you have to then make that accommodation. So it might be, then she backed up and tried to run over him again. And so again, you see the prediction there actually failed, and then we accommodate the new information. Part of the way that we guide kids through this is through meaningful questioning. So in here, we see the excerpt, Johnny drove a new red sports car. In just 3 weeks, he had 14 tickets and had been in 3 accidents. So here's some questions related to Johnny's driving. And we notice that in the first 2, what did Johnny drive and how many tickets did he have? We can see that we can pull those right off of the page. They're what we call textually explicit. Where we get into creating higher order thinking and activating more schema is to ask questions on the inferential and the applied level. So what kind of driver was Johnny? And then what could be done to improve Johnny's driving? These questions take them off the page and then into some higher order thinking. And this is where we want kids to be eventually, which is why the prompts that we ask questions are so important. And we're going to get more into this idea of questioning later on as well. Okay? So results from the NAP study reveal that many middle school students don't understand grade level text beyond a literal level of understanding. Okay? So as I thought about this, it raised some questions for me. One is, what is the efficacy demand here? If we're just asking what kind of car did Johnny drive and how many tickets did he have, is there a high degree of efficacy there? And does he guarantee understanding? Second is, how does this affect performances in other discipline? Are they getting the same steady diet of these literal questions? And if so, are we generating any critical thinking along the way? And what do you think happens when they get to high school, when the reading becomes much more complicated, or as my students used to say, more complexicated, the higher up in the grades that they go? Sort of like in the instance where the teacher says, all right, who can tell me where Washington crossed the Delaware? And the student answers at the top of page 178. Probably not the answer they were looking for, okay? So when we engage in schema activation activities, we can encourage more critical thinking along the way. Now, if you'll turn to page 35A, you'll see a one-page explanation for the use of anticipation guides. And I wanted to share a couple of ideas about anticipation guides with you because they're such a significant way of activating schema and also introducing key vocabulary. So this is a one-page explanation of how to create anticipation guides. And then there's a directions sheet in addition to supplement this on page 35. Now you've seen anticipation guides as I've introduced them to you before, but I wanted to share one more with you that is a more rigorous piece of text, and it's a point I want to make about how we construct these, okay? So what you see on page 36 is an anticipation guide for an article called Childhood's End, which was an article that was written in Time magazine some time ago about school violence. And this particular article had to do with the fact that a high school in New York had to set up a grievance room because so many kids were getting shot and killed every weekend. So I decided to pursue this and create an anticipation guide. And I want you to take a look at the statements and assess if you think these statements would be provocative, and then I'll make a couple of comments about them. Number one, society is becoming more violent. Agree or disagree? Number two, teenagers are the most violent group in society. Agree or disagree? Number three, it's okay to fight as long as nobody gets hurt. Number four, kids fight because their parents tell them to fight. Number five, under certain conditions, it's okay to take a life. Number six, weapons should be outlawed for everyone. Number seven, the responsibility to protect yourself and your family is more important than worrying about whether or not someone gets killed. And number eight, kids carry guns because it makes them feel important. So the first question is, do you think these questions would be provocative in terms of stimulating a discussion? Or these rather statements, rather. What do you think?
I think for sure, simply because they're almost all controversial topics.
Yeah, they're all controversial topics, okay? What else? Anybody have any other ideas or observations? Thank you, Daniel. Michael.
Maybe depending on the conditions in which this kid is living, this could be a little intense.
Yeah.
This might not be something they're comfortable talking about in school.
Sure, which is okay. I like to be provocative in that way because there's a general sentiment here that we want to address, and the article is going to address it more directly. But a couple of things about this. If you notice that many of these statements, if not all of them, are gross generalizations, right? So society is becoming more violent. You know, agree or disagree. Some people will say yes, some people will say no. I want to provoke this cross discussion in terms of why people think it might be or why it may not be. Then the other one is directly aimed, no pun intended, at the students. Teenagers are the most violent group in society. And my hunch is that this would spark a lot of discussion because some people would say that they're not. And if you take a look at, if they're aware of the incidents out of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School in Florida, you can see that the whole movement there that began there would indicate that a lot of teenagers are not violent. In fact, they speak out against violence. And then just some basic, kind of general, I don't know what to call it, playground philosophy. It's okay to fight as long as nobody gets hurt, for kids to fight because their parents tell them to. And then just some general, agree or disagree. Again, the stakes here are fairly low because there's no wrong or right answer. It's simply your dispositions and attitudes and beliefs. And so this is what we bring to the conversation, and the discussion can move along for quite a period of time because the kids get invested in it. And then the article is actually on page 37. And once you get past, and if you notice, it's interesting because the article was written many years ago, but it's still very pertinent today. But the article begins with a review of Slaughterhouse-Five, Kurt Vonnegut's book, which may not be something that kids are aware of. So I may skip that part of the article altogether and then get into the meat, in terms of what the artist is attempting to say. But it's a great way to provoke discussion. And I always share this because there's a point to be made in that we want kids to be invested in the activity and get them prepped for the reading. And one of the ways we do that is to be provocative. And you can be provocative safely with, gross generalizations because you want kids to be able to refute or agree some of the ideas. Okay, so this is sort of what I like to share in terms of the anticipation guides because they're such high yield activities as a way of activating schema, getting kids into the reading. So there's an example there for you, and directions are also in this section. Now going back to the notion of efficacy and our own personal sense of efficacy and what we think about with respect to students, the question is, how did we study in high school? And then what happened when, we oftentimes think about how we studied in school, and then when we got to college, how did we study? So let me ask you, when you got to college, what are some things that you found out that you needed to do in order to study? In the transition from high school to college? Because, in college, there are very few times where you're going to be answering questions at the back of the book. Mike?
You have to gather all the right information.
Okay. And once you gather, what do you do with it?
Try to organize it in a way that you can access whatever you need to study.
Okay.
In the right order.
Okay. Any other ideas? Yeah, Marisol?
I feel like a lot of the time in high school, your teachers gave you a study guide and told you like what you needed to study. And in college, it was really just like creating your own study guide and figuring out, okay, what do I think is important and what do I think I'll be tested on?
Okay, good. Mhm. Any other ideas? Nobody studied in college?
I feel like in high school, the students, if they decide they can do the work, but in college you have no other option. You have to do it because you have to do it.
Yeah, but what do you do? What is the it?
It's more consistency and a lot of research.
Okay. So then you need to know how to do research, right? Not so easy, is it? I mean, when you think about your own experiences, a lot of us mimic what we saw other people doing. But when I ask this question, and it's interesting some of the answers that come up. Note cards? Anybody use note cards when they studied? Yeah, okay. What about outlines? Did you make an outline of some sort? A rendering of the text somehow? Anybody get together with other people and talk about it, form study groups? How about highlighters, the ubiquitous highlighters? The problem with a highlighter is that, when you're highlighting, because you can write in the books now because you bought them, that, you're highlighting everything that looks important, right? But the problem is everything looks important. So if you buy a freshman's book that's used, you find the first 27 pages are solid yellow, pink, or green because they think everything's important. And the highlighter will last around 27 pages in a typical textbook. Cramming. Anybody try cramming before the test? Where? Yeah. And I have to tell you, I wasn't a stellar student either. When I graduated college, it wasn't cum laude or summa cum laude. It was more like thank you, laude. I was able to even get out of it. Okay. So, I can relate. Now, the other thing that's interesting is investigations have shown that middle school students who have difficulty reading don't use effective strategies. So let me ask you a question. How many of you found that when you were assigned a chapter to read in high school or junior high or middle school, and you had to answer the questions at the back of the book, back of the chapter, what's the first thing you did? Mike?
You look at the questions to see what information you need to find.
Right. So you look at the question, and then you go back to the front of the chapter, and you scan the page for some sort of graphic signal that was mentioned in the question, then you'll form an answer. And then for question number 2, you go back to read number 2 and do the same thing. We call this window washer or ping pong reading. But it's probably not very effective in terms of how it's able to work with kids in terms of their comprehension. So, for example, how many people would say that as you think back on your high school experiences that the teachers either lectured to you or you read the chapter from the text? Would that be standard fare? Okay, how many people would say that as a student, your job was to read the text or to take notes? How many people would say that your assessment were reports on what was read or what was said? And how many would say that you were asked to either make an inference to analyze or dispute a claim in any class? Occasionally this happens, oftentimes it's more rare. So I want to show you how sometimes it can be a false positive. So here's a little story. I'd like you all to unmute your screen for now. Unmute your video. And I'm going to read a story to you, and then we're going to answer some questions. And the story here is called The Marsden Jupiter for Farfie. Story goes, Bliss was very fraper. She had denarpen Farfie's Marsden. She didn't tell the Jupiter for him, so she calanted to plimp a Marsden binky for him. She just sparked the binky when Farfie gibbled in the gorger. Floasty Marsden, Farfie, clopped Bliss. Oh, said Farfie, today is Agsan, and my Marsden is Stansan. Bliss chifed, when that roostman, I won't wank you Jupiter till Stansan. So let me give you some sheltered instruction here on some of the words here to help build your academic vocabulary, okay? So the first word is Fraper. Can you all say Fraper out loud?
Fraper.
Fraper.
Fraper, and that's a font that's next conflation. Can you say Denarpin?
Denarpin.
And that means to foggle. Gerbiter is a Whislet to signify hazards. Can you all say Gerbiter?
Gerbiter.
Good. We're learning vocabulary. And Plimp is to gloggaplongs. This is a binky. Can you all say Plimp?
Plimp.
Good. And then Marsden is a Scot that blies once a Cleon. Can you all say Marsden?
Marsden.
Great. Well, now I think we're ready for the test. So there's some things we want to know. We want to know why was Gliss Fraper. We want to know what didn't Gliss Talp. We want to know what did Gliss Colant. We want to know what did Gliss just Sparv. We want to know where did Farfie Gibble. And we want to know when will Gliss wank Farfie Gerbiter. Okay? So let's take a look at the first question. Why was Gliss Fraper? Take a look at the text and see if you can figure it out. Anybody care to give an answer?
Was it because she didn't tell Gerbiter for him?
Okay. And what didn't Gliss Talp?
In Talpa Jupiter.
Yeah, and actually she was Fraper because she did Arp and Farfie's Marsden, right? So now we're seeing that she didn't Talpa Gerbiter for him. And what did Gliss Colant?
So Clamping Marsden binky for him.
Right, good. Okay. And what did Gliss just Sparv?
The binky.
Right, he Sparv the binky. And where did Farfie Gibble?
In the Gorger?
Right, good. And when will Gliss wank Farfie's Gerbiter?
He'll stand San.
Right, good. Okay, so it's interesting here that we got the questions, the answers to the questions correct, right? But you have no idea what you're talking about. And it's the same thing that happens with kids when we do that ping pong reading. We can't be sure that they're actually really comprehending what it is that's in the reading, okay? So what's the strategy for this? Well, the strategy is to look at the question, find the graphic signal, and then go ahead and construct an answer, which has a pretty good chance of being correct, but it doesn't indicate that we really have the knowledge of what it is that we're even talking about. So we have to go a little bit deeper with kids in terms of ensuring that they have understanding. Now, if we were to take the story and make it more sensible, then obviously we wouldn't have that problem because everybody has background knowledge in this area here, right? So this is just a little story that's another version of the Marsden Gerbiter for Farfie. You kind of get the idea. It's a story about getting somebody's birthday date wrong and then baking the cake at the right time. So you can have the answers, but not the understanding. And by the way, this poor guy is what we call a meth lab. So with academic language, then, it's often been conceived as decontextualized language, which means that there's much more distance between the reader and the text, in contrast to conversational language, which occurs in a shared physical context. It's also described as being explicit, as if all that were needed was to interpret it, was located within the text, but it's actually not, which is why when we talk about context clues, for example, then it's not as easy as it sounds, because sometimes, particularly in informational text, we made this point last time, that the context is not always there. So in terms of the domains of interaction, where we enter is this notion of moving from fluency and using phonology as a bridge to schema. And that lets us begin to clear the fog. Now, as an example of this, this is a simulation, but you'll kind of get the idea. Here you see, with limited amount of processing information, you see some terms here And the trick for this is to say it aloud to yourself over and over again, and you'll finally figure out what it is that they're talking. So this is the way that the brain processes from sound to concept, using the symbols as the bridge, symbols of the letters as a bridge. And this is what this activity simulates. So if we say the first one aloud, just repeat it with me. Shocked, cuss, toe. Say it again.
Jacques Cousteau.
Okay. And who might this be in this
Jacques
person?
Cousteau.
Yeah, Jacques Cousteau. Okay. See if you can figure out the others.
Santa Claus.
Good, Santa Claus.
Moby Dick.
Moby Dick.
No, sure.
Noah's Ark, right? If you say it aloud to yourself, it's better to use the auditory system to make this
Thomas
happen.
Jefferson.
Right, good.
The Titanic?
Right, good.
I love you.
I love you too.
Dr. Seuss.
Good.
Milky Way galaxy.
Good.
The Sound of Music.
Good. All right. So what happens here is your brain kicks in and starts putting these together, and eventually the concept comes in if you have prior knowledge of these particular people. Okay, and this is the way the brain begins to process going from phonology into actually understanding the concepts. So when we describe schema, we describe it as being the theory of the world inside your head or background knowledge, and this includes the type of text that you have read. The best definition I've heard is that the information in your brain that doesn't go away when the lights go out. It's everything that you have in your head, and we're in a constant process of assimilating new information and accommodating new information that becomes part of our assimilated schema, or what we call earlier those spider webs. So here's an excerpt of an activity that some of you may or may not have a schema for. Just take a minute and read it over and see if anybody can figure out what this is referencing. Anybody have an idea? Any predictions? If you've never done it, then it probably won't be in your schema. But this is what happens when we fly a kite. So now read it again, knowing that you're flying a kite, and see where the clues are. Makes more sense now, yes? Now, some of you may have not have ever flown a kite. But this would be a good activity to do an intro to the kite runner if you're reading that novel in your class. So when you've been background knowledge to the task, you read selectively for different purposes. Reading them becomes a process of eliminating unlikely alternatives. So as you begin to piece together the information, then as you make predictions, your predictions will fall away as you accumulate more information and more insight. And that's the purpose of that activity. So the cognitive scientists use the technical term schema to describe how people use prior knowledge to organize and store information in their heads. Schema activation is the mechanism by which people access what they know and match it to the information in the text. And in doing so, they build on meaning they bring to a learning situation. Through schema activation, readers can make inferences, predictions about information, as well as fill in the gaps. And the process by which information is organized helps in the retention of information so that learners can elaborate. So when it comes to language, of course, part of that has to do with grammar. And obviously, grammar has been an issue all the way through time. Remember, you can never end a sentence with a whatever that is. So with schema, we talk about the background knowledge, the metalinguistic in terms of understanding the way words work, and the linguistic aspect of sentence structure and linguistic knowledge. The order in which words appear is fairly regular in our language. We make changes when we need to. For example, usually we're subject, predicate, subject, verb. Bless you. When we want to make a question, then we put the verb first in lieu of the subject. Of course, grammar is a part of that as well. Idiomatic expressions become a challenge for our English learners, obviously. If you tell a student who's a newcomer you have too much time on your hands, it's pretty much difficult for them to understand exactly what that means unless they have about 3 or 4 watches that they're holding. Pragmatics, meanings when and how to use certain words in certain situations. And of course, the schema for academic language, which is a whole new ball of wax for kids once they leave elementary school and begin reading mostly informational text, and academic language becomes more of a challenge. With a high level of background knowledge, we're not as dependent on the text itself. Most of you, if you came to this sign, would probably know what to do, I'm guessing, right? Wouldn't necessarily need to see it. And so again, we continually have to bring background knowledge and prior knowledge in to the learning. As the caption here says, I forgot to make a backup copy of my brain, so everything I learned last semester was lost. Is probably not too far from the truth. So we know that all new learning builds on prior learning. When we activate and build students' background knowledge, then students see the connection between previous and current learning. We establish a set of conceptual hooks on which students can hang new learning, again, fatten those spider webs. They get on the same page where we want them to be. We receive formative assessment data we can use throughout the learning experience. So anticipation guides and prediction ABCs and even vocabulary collection activities can be seen as formative assessments. So there's a lot of these ways that we can begin to introduce concepts rather than just dumping a load of information on them without assessing what they know and also trying to make those connections to build more sense of connection and relevance to the learning. But remembering new information on a familiar topic is relatively easy because developing associations between your existing network and the new material is easy. Remembering information on a brand new topic is difficult because there's no existing network in your memory that new information could be tied to. So this is why we need to introduce things like schema activation activities such as anticipation guides and some of the other ones that we've learned. And also vocabulary instruction can be a part of that as well. But word recognition of fluency by itself may not be enough. So some of you may understand this phrase or this little sentence, but some of you, or paragraph rather, but some of you may not. So let's take a look at it and see if anybody can figure out what this is. White won by 50-50 to gapping the kink on his way up, and then 50-50 and back down the kink rail to 360 out. He also 270'd onto the kink and tore apart both C rails. So anybody want to venture a guess as to what's going on here?
Is he skating?
Skating? Yeah, good guess. It's funny because this appeared in the LA Times in 2005. There are a couple of clues here, if you're aware of it, but the first one is the name White.
Is it snowboarding?
Yeah. It was the first big snowboarding competition, and White basically made his chops on that particular competition. But when I read that in the LA Times sports section, I thought, I have no idea what they're talking about. So it's interesting, just pretty much a good example. If you don't have the schema for it, then you're totally lost. And the thing is, without background knowledge, students will maintain confusion. How many of you have seen this look on your students' faces from time to time? Even cartoons require somewhat a degree of background knowledge, as in these here. What do you need to know in order to make sense of this particular cartoon?
The story of Noah's Ark.
Yeah? And what else? Well, the fact that dinosaurs became extinct, right? You need to know that as well. What about this one? Well, you need to know the food chain, right? And you need to know the issue of pollution in the ocean. What about this one?
Anteaters eat ants.
Yeah. But what's the significance of the cartoon, though, when he says you only brought 2 ants?
Not enough food to eat.
Yeah, because Noah brought 2 of every species, right? Same here. What about this one? Bull in China shop? Anybody familiar with that phrase? No? Again, depends on your background if you know it. Now here's an illustration. Now that we know this, for our science and our physics people, it leads to this. Why science teachers should not be given playground duty. What does this refer to?
Early bird gets the worm.
Yeah, right. Anybody here ever use cassette tapes?
It's a nesting doll.
Yeah, if you don't know what a Russian doll is, this will not make any sense.
It has many. Oh,
Uh-huh.
Damn, that's funny. Books are managed easier.
Yeah, you need to know that books are made out of paper, right?
Yeah.
And paper comes from wood.
Where's Waldo?
Yep.
Curiosity killed a cat.
Yep.
Van Gogh cut off his ear.
Mm-hmm.
It's the saying, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
Yep. The story about Isaac Newton discovering gravity when an apple fell on his head, right? Okay, so you kind of get the idea that there's a lot of dependency on cartoons. Some of you will know this one.
This little piggy went to market.
There you go. Okay. So one of the things that we also think about here in terms of the anticipation guide, once again, is the ones that I've shown you before. And this one is from the Taser. And there's a template for the anticipation guide that should be in Canvas as well. Again, the idea is to have them respond, agree or disagree, come up with the reasons that they write down as to why they agreed or disagreed. And then in the space below, they write their reasons. And then after the activity, we have them draw a picture that illustrates something that they will think will be a prediction as to what they're going to be studying. Okay. And again, the directions are in page 35A and so forth and so on. Okay. If you turn to page in your reader part 1, page 1A, and would you fill in the graphic organizer here for schema? Can you double check that people came in late? Okay, well, hey, guess what? It's time for a brain break. Are you ready? Here we go. Fred, did you hear about the fight that broke out at the fish market? Ned, yeah, I heard that several fish were battered. Oh, boy. Fred, did you hear about the butcher that backed into his meat grinder? Ned, yeah, I bet he got a little behind in his work. Oh, just terrible jokes. Okay. So now we dip into the area known as cognitive strategies. We're going to begin this. So just to review, we talked about fluency, and we also indicated background knowledge has to do with not only the knowledge of the language, but also knowledge of the material and how important it is to activate schema to get kids to come into the learning strategy, and anticipation guides and vocabulary instruction being a couple of those methods. With cognitive strategies, then, we want to begin to make text connections in terms of how they see the experiences related to their own lives, how we guide students through comprehension. We model for them and engage them in activities of strategic reading and fix-up strategies so they know what to do when things go wrong. And this is where we're going to see a lot of strategies. We saw some in Chapter 7, and we're going to see more next time in Chapter 10. But let's just define terms for a minute. Reading strategies are those deliberative cognitive acts that we as proficient readers use without even realizing it. For example, one fix-up might be that if we're reading something and we don't understand it, then normally we'll go back and read it again to make sure that we clarify the information that's in our heads. So we're reading minds on as opposed to simply eyes on. Instructional strategies, then, are those teaching techniques that teachers model and use to help students become more independent readers and learners. So we put them into the footsteps or the behavioral patterns of proficient readers so that they can adapt to these strategies and become more independent in their own approaches. Now, what's interesting is the annual survey that University of Indiana used in over 81,000 students in 110 high schools across states, and predominantly in the Midwest, but mimicked and resembled all of the other states as well, even though they say the results can't be generalized. But they came up with some interesting results. What do they say about being bored in school? Students said that fewer than 2% of students, the study said fewer than 2% of students said they're never bored in high school. 75% said I don't like, 73% rather said I didn't like the school. 61% said I didn't like the teachers. 60% said I didn't see the value in the work I was being asked to do. And about 25% said no adults in the school cared about me, which is indicative of the detachment that students have not only to the curriculum, but also just to the general operation of school itself. What we know is that students want more interactive classes, prefer activities that involve interactions with teachers and peers. More than 80% of classroom discussion and debate rated classroom discussion and debate at least a little and sometimes very exciting and engaging, and more than 70% felt this way about group projects. Just 52% said that teachers' lectures are engaging at all. But although we have to do it, we have to come up with ways to make it more interesting. Now, one of the things that we looked at in the current chapter, two things rather, the QAR and the QTA, which are more in terms of mimicking what proficient readers do as we guide them through the reading, okay? But the goal here is really the notion of comprehension. And so what is comprehension? It refers to the cognitive strategies or behaviors that a proficient reader uses before, during, and after. That's the important part here, before, during, and after. Reading, these behaviors include how they tap into their prior knowledge about the subject, how they question or predict what they might be going to understand, and how they reflect on validity of the information and any biases by the author or ourselves. But in order to get kids to do this, we have to guide them through the process. We want our students to be thoroughly engaged in the text. Sometimes it's really hard to get them away from a really good book, no matter what, even in an alien abduction. So if we think about a deeper approach to reading, we want them to have the ability to analyze, to synthesize, to solve problems, and to think metacognitively. In other words, knowing what they know and what they don't know, in order to negotiate meanings with the author and construct new meaning from the text. The reader makes connections to already known concepts and principles and uses the understanding for problem-solving contexts. When we embed literacy strategies into our instruction, it takes time and repetition for students to internalize these approaches. It doesn't happen quickly. And this guy, as you can see, is going to be working quite a while. So with cognitive strategies, then, we know that students become more engaged in learning and achieve more when they have a sense of efficacy or confidence in ways of learning. And the idea behind the strategies is to give them scaffolding and guidance so that eventually we can release some of that from them. A lot of students think that learning happens almost magically just by glossing over the material. This would be tantamount to putting the book under your pillow at night and hoping that through the process of diffusion and osmosis that the material will somehow enter your brain. But we know it just doesn't happen that way, right? And again, we know that one of the issues is that this has become more normalized with kids who simply are glancing over text as they skim through it. And it becomes an end unto itself. So in terms of actual reading skills, some of these ideas we want kids to be able to internalize are understanding why they're reading what they're reading, making inferences, in other words, connecting to what they already know to what they don't know, identifying main ideas and knowing the main focus, being able to summarize, in other words, getting the gist of what's going on, such as the paraphrase and the quick write, making predictions, which we do internally without even realizing it, knowing when we don't understand something, re-inspecting when we don't understand something, we go back and reread it, using visualization to create a mental model or a movie, and making connections to new information. When we do these things and we let kids practice it, then we can make these part of consistent classroom procedures and routines and add to a sense of security. But it's important to carefully plan for all contingencies, because this is where, when we're coming up with cognitive strategies, we need to make sure that we're very explicit, okay? And it's important when giving directions to be very specific. You'll see that in this little case here, okay?
And we just did an exercise and building trust between one another. So Harrison, you don't mind going first. Step up here on this chair and close your eyes. All right. And then everybody fill in. And we're going to ask you to fall, and then they will catch you. But you have to trust us. I'm going to count to 3. Just relax and fall. Okay? 1, 2, 3.
He missed an important direction there, didn't he? Right? In terms of where you're supposed to go. The word back may have been useful here. So it's important that once instructions are given, that everyone is on the same page. Okay? And that is why we lift on 3. So in other words, you have to be aware of what's going on around you. So let's take a look at 4 parts of a lesson format. And if you turn to page 41, we'll generate our entry into cognitive strategies. So on page 41, we divide the lesson up into basically 4 parts. One of them is accessing prior knowledge. And I use the symbol of the elephant there because elephants remember everything, don't they? So we've seen that in order to engage in activation of schema, we can use graphic organizers. We can use anticipation guides, a KWL, which we'll be doing a little bit later. Pre-teaching with visuals, so we know we can show pictures of what it is that we're going to be studying. We may take a survey of our students to see what they know or if they've experienced anything relative to what they were teaching. We introduce vocabulary, and we can create a cluster, where a cluster is basically like a brainstorm that we then turn into a graphic organizer. So let's say that I was doing a cluster on the topic of baseball. So we would ask kids to give us words that they know about baseball. So we might get glove, bat, ball, bases, field, diamond, positions, pitcher, catcher, something like that. And then what we do is we'll take that, and this is how we build an inductive data set. We put them into a category, and so we may have a category of equipment, we may have a category of positions, or we may have a category of teams, all these different ways that we can engage in categories, and that becomes our word cluster as a way of introducing the activity. On page 41, is where we engage kids in reading strategies. Now, I want to make a point here that has come up also in some of your IQs, and that is that a lot of our students did not get an early start in reading. Oftentimes we know that The reading experiences they've had at home have been next to none. So the demand on us then is to incorporate reading into our teaching. And there are several ways we can do this, but I just want to make a point here that part of our class time, by default, has to be dedicated to allowing kids to read with guided reading in our classrooms because, again, they haven't had that early start. And part of that has to do with the way in which we let kids practice the notion of inferencing, which we're going to talk about later as well, but also moving to not oral reading only, but silent reading as well. And again, using things like the quick write to encourage that. And then a couple of strategies that we're going to share. One is the directed reading sequence, and the other one has to do with how we do a read aloud with our students so that they begin to hear the inner voice, develop that inner voice for the text. And then part of the guidance part of this and the direct instruction has to do with page 43, where we engage kids in discussion groups. We utilize questions and answers as a way of guiding comprehension. Some of the tools we use can include mind mapping and graphic organizers, and also prepackaged and teacher-generated questions. The thing with prepackaged questions is that while textbook questions, such as questions at the back of the chapter, are not really written for any particular audience, we can cater to our kids by crafting questions that are more related to them, which will make it easier for them to work with. And then also using group activities like consensus building and group process, utilizing student-generated questions, and using question stems and the Q matrix and the facts room, which we'll be doing next week, or next time we meet. So you get an idea of what these are. And then the final part has to do with extension and review. Now we take the activity and extend it, and then come back and review it through other activities such as an inside-outside circle, structural indexing, or a four corners quiz, which we'll share later on in the next few sessions as well. So again, this gives you kind of a breakdown in terms of what we're after for handling the text and guiding kids through it. Okay. So the question that we want to ask now, and if you can give me on three a big now what? The question is now what? Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Now what?
What?
Now what?
All right. That didn't wake up any neighbor. Let's turn to page 45. And we're going to look at something that has been mentioned before, but I wanted to share a slightly different version of it with you. And this is the KWL chart. And we're going to be looking at something that has to do with the crocodile. But before we do that, in the upper part of the paper here, where it says what I know, I'd like each of you to grab a pen or pencil and write down 3 things in that section that you know about crocodiles. Okay, who can share one thing they know about crocodiles? Okay, Marisol?
They're reptiles.
Okay. Anthony, did you have a hand up too?
Was that for me?
I thought you had a hand up, yeah.
Oh, so, they have a long tail.
Okay. Leah?
The largest is the Nile crocodile.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Kat? I think you have a hand up.
They're semi-aquatic.
Semi-aquatic, okay. Let's see who else has a hand up. Kalia?
They use vibrations for like aggressive behavior.
Okay. And Mike?
They can eat you.
They can eat you. That's right. Okay. Let's see. Did I get everybody? I'm just checking my screen. Okay. So each of these things that we're going to share, we're going to put up and display somewhere. So what we've done is we've collected some ideas that people know about crocodiles. But, you know, the fact of the matter is that some of you may not be right, first of all. And secondly, if I were to ask you, based on this, what do you think you know about crocodiles, which is in the next square, that won't make any sense because you've already pretty much given me what you think you know. So we use another activity. If you turn to page 46, we're going to use these words from the article to make up some prediction statements. And the way this works, and this activity is called possible sentences, what you're going to do is create a sentence where you use at least 3 of the words from this list. So in other words, my sentence might say, crocodiles hunt in the water in Africa. That might be my sentence, okay? And we're going to write these sentences in the what I think I know. So what I'd like you to do is take a few minutes and write 3 prediction sentences from this list in the side of the T-chart on the KWL that says what I think I know. Okay, let's see where we are. Can somebody give me a sentence that you were able to pull together? Okay, Marisol?
I wrote, if you go on an African cruise, crocodiles can be found lurking in the water.
Great, okay, thank you. And by the way, lurking is a word that may or may not be in their expressive receptive vocabulary. So I may need to take a little time to explain some of those words on the list we would also pre-teach. So I'm glad you used that word, okay? Thank you. Let's hear another one. Kalia.
I said they patrol the waters of Africa and hunt antelope with their powerful jaws.
Great, thank you. Good. Anybody else? I'll give you a little more time.
I can share mine.
Okay.
I said I think crocodiles keep their eggs in a nest for 12 weeks.
Okay, good. That's a good one. Marisol?
Yeah, I'll share another one.
Okay.
I also wrote crocodiles use their powerful jaws to bite their prey.
Good. Okay. So what we do is each of these statements, then we collect some, we display them somewhere, because these now are our predictions that now zero more into what we're going to be reading about. Okay, so we've gone from your general understanding, which could be erroneous, to moving more into making predictions related to the actual text that we're going to read. Okay. Now, if you turn back to page 34, you'll see the guidelines for how to do a read aloud. And these are various components that would come into play when we utilize a read aloud. Okay. So you get an idea of the different things that we do there in terms of predicting and visualizing, generating an understanding about when we don't understand something, we have to go back and fix it up. And this, again, this is really modeling what proficient readers normally do, even though they're not being voiced. Now, if you flip back to page 47, you'll see the possible sentences activity that we just did, where we took the words from the reading and we made prediction statements. Because part of what we'll be doing eventually is the checking to make sure that our predictions actually came through and came true, okay? So we're going to be looking at an article, and it just so happens that we've just got something in about crocodiles, as the cartoon says, so we're very fortunate about that. The article that we're going to be looking at is on page 48. And the article is titled, "The Fierce Man-Eating Crocodile is a Gentle and Doting Parent." Now, if you're on 48, I'm 47, 49 rather, sorry. What you'll see on page 48, if you flip back, is our keyword summarizer that we interject into the activity as well to let kids process the information. So this is how it generally works. Okay, so I'm going to model a couple of strategies for us on the crocodile article, so you get an idea of how some of these things can work. So the first thing, and by the way, Roger Farr is known as the father of read and think alouds, and he wrote a book called Think Reading, which was seminal in terms of getting kids to read things aloud. So here's the first paragraph, and I'm going to simulate a read aloud for you as we read this, okay? So the first thing that I want to think about is, I've got a contrast here because the fierce man-eating crocodile is an image in my head, but then the words gentle and doting somehow contrast or contradict my thinking about crocodiles. Okay, and again, doting may be a word that will be unfamiliar, so we'll have to take a little bit of time to explain that word. So throughout history, meaning a long time ago, reptiles have supplied moralists. Let me think on that word for a second. Moralist, I know the word moral is an idea about how you live your life. And I know that if a word has an IST ending on it, it means that it's a person. So moralists must be people who tell you how to live your life. Authors of adventure stories and other writers with personifications of evil. So personification means that I'm attributing a person-like quality to whatever it is that we're going to read. And I'm assuming in this case, it's going to be the crocodile. These scaly beasts that crawl on their bellies and lurk, and again, here's that word again, we have to illustrate it. Somebody have to figure it out. It means they hang out, right? They hang out in low places, seldom inspire admiration or affection. What's interesting about this word is that I don't associate crocodiles with the word affection. It's kind of interesting. But the most evil of the reptiles, the most dangerous and loathsome, is the crocodile, a beast that inhabits many waterways of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Okay, I have a bit of confusion here because I was always under the impression that there were also a lot of crocodiles in Australia. Because as I remember, it was the home of the famous crocodile hunter, and he would be the one on TV to say, oh, look, there's an 18-foot slider right over there, right? He would be the one to be talking about these crocodiles here. So I wonder why they left Australia out. Although there are many theories about why the crocodile is perceived as evil, Alistair Graham, a former Kenya game warden and professional wildlife consultant. Now here I have a picture in my head of this guy dressed in khakis with a jungle hat on, glasses and a big bushy mustache, smoking a pipe, you know, and probably because he's with a name like Alistair is probably English. And that's my vision of this guy popping out of the bushes as a wildlife consultant. And he says, makes a persistent case that it stems from the fact that crocodiles do eat people more so than probably any other predator. And I didn't realize that. I thought, I wonder if that's really true. You know, I'd never really seen anything published about this, so it's interesting to see his observation. And then, where do we go? We go to our keyword summarizer, and we have the kids process, you know, and focus on why are crocodiles perceived as being evil. They'll drop in the comment there, and then we go to paragraph 2. Now, paragraph 2, I'm going to do what we call the embedded question. The embedded question here is underline the part that explains why fewer large crocodiles remain. So read the paragraph to yourself, and I may have to read it to them first and then have them do a repeated reading, and they're going to underline the part that describes or explains why fewer crocodiles remain. Okay? So let's have you go ahead and underline that part, and then we'll share what you agree to. Okay, who can tell me which sentence would answer that question?
Few of the large 12, 15-footers remain.
Okay, that's the result, but what is the reason why few remain? Marcel?
Has been killed for their skin.
Okay, yeah, so they're hunted for their skins, which is why so few remain, okay? And then we go back to the keyword summarizer, and we have the kids talk about why they're hunted for their skins, okay? Now, for this one, we're going to do what we call smart notes. So if you turn to the last page, 51, you'll see in the box there, we're going to do a little bit of an annotation, and it's going to be a qualified annotation, meaning that we're going to annotate based upon certain criteria. So as you read the paragraph, if there's something you agree with, then you'll put an A, in the text next to that sentence. And if you can't write it in the book, we can always use Post-its, right? And if there's something that makes you think I disagree with that, then you would put an X. If there's new information, then you'll put a plus. If there's a question mark, if there's something that makes you say, I wonder about that, then you put a question mark. If there's something that you don't understand, you'll put 3 question marks. And if there's something that makes you say, wow, you'll put an exclamation point. So take a minute and annotate this, and I'm going to put the qualifiers up here on the screen so you don't have to flip pages. And as you read paragraph 3, go ahead and make a determination as to which of these best fits in a particular place in that paragraph.
Pardon me, what page is that on again?
We're on page 49, paragraph 3. Okay, let's do a quick check. Is there something in the paragraph that might have made you think I agree with that? Anybody have an A in there somewhere? What about disagree? Anything in there make you think I disagree with that? What about new information? Okay, let's hear some of the ideas. Anthony?
Sorry, I was muted. I'm sorry. One of the informations that I learned was that they hunt cooperatively.
Okay, all right, thank you. Kat?
I did the that each time during one time each year in which crocodiles are sexually active, they are monogamous.
Okay, and Daniel?
Just the fact that in this paragraph they made it seem like they were not human, but the fact that like they live together, they're good parents, I guess, and they have rituals that they abide by.
Okay, and Michael, do you have something too?
Oh, I had somebody else caught the same thing, that they were monogamous.
Okay, and what about I wonder about that? Anybody have I wonder about that? Okay, Leah?
I put that I wonder I wonder about how the male and female engage in a courtship ritual.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. What does that look like? Is that like a bouquet of flowers and an antelope leg, or what? How does that happen, right? Okay, anybody else have an I wonder about that? What about I don't get it? And what about wow? Okay, Laura?
And I'm sorry. I saw it. Perhaps the most unexpected finding involves the parental behavior of these huge reptiles.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have a wow? Now, it could be that somebody's wow could have been somebody's new information. You may have just categorized it a different way. So if you want to say, for example, that they're monogamous was your wow, that's fine. Any other wows? Kelia?
I put crocodiles become sexually mature at around 12 to 15 years of age.
Yeah.
I thought they would have been sexually mature like earlier than that.
Yeah. Yeah. They wait till they get into middle school, right? Just like we do. Okay. All right. So that's one way in which we can vary the reading activity. And then when we get to paragraph 4, actually, once we do that, we go back and we can fill in the keyword summarizer, right? And then for paragraph 4, what we could do is the reading request. And that's another strategy that we use sometimes. And you'll find an explanation for that on page 52, okay? Where we just introduce the reading request as a way of, again, reciprocating questions where I will read the text together and I'll put my book down and ask the students to ask me questions. And then I will go ahead and model the questioning by asking them questions. My questions are going to be more higher order, and theirs will probably be more literal. Okay, the reading request directions are there. Now, if we were meeting in person, we would take the time to do this, but we can't really do this it's because of the limitations of the virtual world. So I'm going to have to walk you through what happens next. Okay, so after we finish this activity and we've read the article, then we're going to do something called the window pane. And the window pane is, you'll find the graphic for this on page 53. And in this activity, we assign the students a particular section to read. And if I'm in pods, then I'll have all my number ones will read paragraph 5. All my number 2s will read paragraph 6 and 7. My 3s will read paragraph 8, and my 4 will read paragraph 9. And if I have 5, I'll split up 6 and 7. The job here in the window pane is to make an illustration of what they read. And in the illustration, they don't use any words. They can use numbers, but no words. So what they'll do is they'll do an illustration that will show part of the story that they read. So this would be an illustration for paragraph 5 when the mother or the father takes the hatchlings down to the water. Okay, and what we do here with this is each of them, and it doesn't matter, what the artistic quality is. It's just a matter of getting things on paper, because then what's going to happen is each pod member is going to explain to the other members of the pod what is in their picture, and this is how they discuss the information. So the activity is called preview review. So the first thing that happens is after we give them time to do the drawing. And by the way, again, artistic quality doesn't matter. My alligators, quite frankly, always look like cows, okay? So don't have to worry about that. But once we finish the drawing, then person number 1 will explain the drawing to the rest of the pod. Now, the pod has not read that paragraph. The only person that's read that paragraph is person number 1. So what's going to happen is after they explain it, then the pod will read that paragraph. So they've been given really an auditory preview of the text. And once they finish reading it, they're going to go back to the drawing and they're going to make suggestions about what the pod member could do to enhance the drawing. Right? Because you want to put as much information on it as you can to reflect the reading. And then the process continues all the way through the pod. And then it's a repetitive process until you get all the way through. Once the pod finishes, the idea is that they will put all of their window panes together to make a French door. And what they have is a graphic study guide of the material that they read. And some of our kids are very good at transposing information artistically, but not so great with writing. So we want to give them an opportunity to exercise some of their strengths. For the kids who aren't there yet, like me, we need to have that practice. So we're making the right brain association to the text and letting kids do some illustration. A lot of our kids really like to illustrate, particularly with the advent of more comic books and graphic novels. They do some on their own anyway. So why not use it as one of the activities? So when they put the window pane together, then what they have is a nice study guide. And what we created really is a graphic organizer of the reading. And then if we want to, we can even go back and put the words in there to make the labels as to what's going on. Okay? So here's a window pane for paragraph 9. Basically what this talks about is how the crocodiles hunt cooperatively, and then they will work together to tear the animal apart, and then eventually they will eat it together. Okay, so that's what the storybook line is on paragraph 9. Here's another window pane in paragraph 9. Obviously, the student was very artistically talented, but again, doesn't matter what their artistic quality is. It's allowing them to exercise some right brain processing of the information. And so once we've scaffolded the text enough, then they'll do this sort of rendering in artistic fashion. Okay? By the way, you can distinguish an alligator from a crocodile by paying attention to whether the animal says "see you later" or "in a while." Now, the other way that we address this is through something called a close reading annotation. And in this close reading annotation, we go through each paragraph and we pose a question. And the question in this case is, what does the author discuss? Why does the author, it should be, why does the author discuss the idea that crocodiles are thought of as evil? What is the reason for crocodiles rarely growing beyond 6 to 9 feet? So again, this is reviewing the information. Another way to address it, and it can coincide with the reading as well. And I put the template for this in Canvas as well. There's another way to allow them to process the information. And this could be a review activity as well, where they go through a second reading. Now, inside-outside circle is another strategy that we like to use, and I just have to walk you through it because we can't do it here. But normally what happens is that as the kids are doing their drawing, we will give them a 3x5 card and ask them to create a question from the reading that they're doing. And then underneath the question, they'll write the answer. And it's usually fairly literal. And this is a great way to review the text. So if you turn to page 54, you'll see a graphic of the inside-outside circle. This is also a good way to get them up and on their feet. So what we'll do is we'll create 2 concentric circles. The one on the inside is facing out, and the one on the outside is facing in, just like the picture. So then the way that we do the protocol is we'll ask the person on the inside to read their question to the person on the outside. If the person on the outside knows the answer, the person on the inside will say, "Good job." And then if they don't know the answer, they'll tell them the answer. And then the person on the outside will repeat, asking their question of the person on the inside. If they know the answer, they say, "Good job." If they don't know the answer, then they'll tell them the answer. When they finish, and I usually give them about 20 seconds to do this, then they both hold their card up, and then they trade cards. So now I have the card of the person in front of me, and they have mine. And then the direction is for the inside circle to move one person to your right. So now you're in front of a new person with a new question, and both of you have new questions. So then you repeat the process, you ask each other again. At the end of 20 seconds, each of them will hold up their card, they'll trade cards, and this time the person on the outside will move one to their right. So you'll continue this process, alternating inside and outside, until eventually, excuse me, you'll get back to the person that you started with. This is a great review activity, and again, it's mostly literal level stuff, but it's a really great way to get the kids on their feet and reviewing the information. Of course, you check the questions for 2 things. One, to make sure that they have a salient question, and that I would say there are no yes or no questions. You have to have an answer, not just a yes or no. And secondly, that the answer that they wrote is on the front of the card, because you don't want to be there asking the question of the kid and they're reading the answer on the back of the card. So it's very important that you remember that. So if you look at page 55, pages 55 through 57, I've included 55 through 50, maybe it's 56, I've included what the directions for how to do an inside-outside circle. And again, if we were in person, we would be doing this, but we can't do it virtually, unfortunately. Now, we go back to the KWL. The first thing we do is we check our predictions in terms of what we think we know about the crocodile. Some of these may be erroneous, so we make the correction. If it's verified, then we'll mark it as verified. If we don't know, then we'll say we need further information. Right? So we label these accordingly. And then we look at our prediction statements on the second, what I think I know, and we double check those to see if we're correct. So if you said that crocodiles look for 172 million years, we probably would need to change that. And then on the third side of the KWL, what we learned about crocodiles. So we go back and we review and process the information and give indications of some of the learning that we understood during that time. Now, if I want to engage them in some more metalinguistic practice with the text, then if you turn to page 57, what we have here is something called the closed procedure. It's also good for teaching, helping with grammar, language development, but also comprehension of the text. So we delete words and we have the kids fill in the words from memory. And this is a great discussion activity, small group activity, or think, pair, share activity to do as well. Now, if it's a little bit too rigorous for my students, then I modify it by going to the next one, which is, and we're only working here with paragraph 5, page 58, which is what we call a crocodile maze activity. The maze activity is where we delete certain words and we put in words that have different grammatical and syntactic functions. What they have to do is they have to figure out which word best fits in the blank in line with comprehending the material. So not only are we doing language development, but we're also focusing on comprehension. And then if I want to be more specific and more targeted, if you turn to page 60, I've noticed that in my students' writing that the subjects and the verbs are always fighting with each other. So I'm going to delete all the verbs. I'm going to put 3 verbs in and let them decide which one best fits. And this is also a good activity to do in pairs or in small group. So we can get a little practice here on their language development in terms of verb and tense, okay? Because it's always a big problem for kids, particularly in that 80% that make up tier 2, subject-verb agreement issues. So then we go back again once we review the KWL and we check on these statements here. Now, we know that after 170 million years or so, crocodiles are still evolving, right? I mean, they're changing up all the time. So we just never know, what this 170 million years is going to get. And even now, we see a movie about crocodiles called Lion, Law, and Crocodile. So, we're kind of hitting the mark here in terms of being very timely. So, again, we've gone through crocodile here, and now we can introduce a writing prompt from the article as well. And the prompt is, some people say that the crocodile is the personification of evil. Those who study crocodiles would disagree. You're a crocodile researcher who has been asked to investigate whether or not crocodiles are really evil. Your task is to gather and analyze information about the crocodile. We're going to explain the, quote, nature of the crocodile to a group of people who are asking that the crocodile be removed from the endangered species list. They want to increase the hunting of crocodiles. Your report should discuss how to justify the crocodile behavior as not evil and that they should remain on the endangered species list. You will deliver this report in written form to this committee. So there's a writing prompt you can also use as a way of checking your understanding and then also getting in to some writing practice as well. And when we get into the writing component, we'll address more of this as well. One final thing for the crocodile, and I'm sure you've had enough crocodile right now, but on page 62 is a sentence combining activity about crocodiles. And so I'd like to challenge them a little bit if you remember Tucker the Trucker was stuck in the mucker Winnemucca, this is the same type of activity where we have them come up with a sentence that combines all these sentences into one, and we give them a couple of the transition words such as when and to build in. Okay, so this is there for you to play with. Not necessarily something you have to do, but again, the more the metalinguistic structure and activity we can give them with a selection of text, the better. Okay, so that's the goal. Okay, more about crocodiles than you ever wanted to know. So obviously next week we don't meet. If you want to stay on track, then the assignment for the following week will be Chapter 10 in VACA, studying text. And then the following week, we'll finish up with Chapter 9, and that's when I will be going over the writing aspect of writing across the curriculum, and that will be our final session that day on the 8th. Again, everything in the folder must be complete by the 15th, and it has to be everything in there in order to pass the class. So make sure that you have everything according to the checklist that you have in there. And with that, I want to wish you all a happy and safe and filling Thanksgiving. And I will look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. If you have any questions, remember to email me, and I'll be sending out a reminder in an email.
There's only one thing.
Yes,
There's only one thing. Yeah, there's only one thing. The VACA Chapter 10, the IQ for the upcoming, is it due in the Thanksgiving break, or is it actually due the week after Thanksgiving break?
It'll be due the week after.
Okay, thank you. Just want clarification.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to turn in early, I know you turn in everything early, so if you want, it's no problem. But yeah, anytime. It's just I gave you the checklist and the pacing so that you'd have plenty of time to manage whatever time you have left. Because I know some of you get really jammed up at the end of the semester because you have other classes that require things too. Okay, all right, everybody, enjoy your turkey, your ham, or whatever it is that you chow down with. Come back fat and happy. And I'll see you all in 2 weeks.
See you, Professor.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.